Kahani Bar brings you a cocktail of stories, both in English and Hindi. I am Richa, and today's story is from our segment Waking Dreams by Neerja K.
This collection of 11 short stories was born there, in that in-between space of strange happenings, somewhere between the truth and the unknown, between dreams and waking up. Whispers in the attic. They had slept in separate rooms again. The poor dog, torn by the hard choices. Whose feet to curl up at? Whose side to take? Who to comfort? Their fights were getting increasingly frequent. The same old grooves, the same patterns, like a Deja hate you. She was so spent, crying and arguing over the same stuff over and over again. Maybe Nikhil and her had been together too long. They both knew exactly where to hurt each other, all the secret places where the old wounds were. She couldn't even remember how it started this time, but she was just grateful to be out of the house this morning. Grateful? Jeez, that sounded horrible. Because poor old Suprabha auntie was very sick. Ria leaned her head against the car window and closed her cried-out eyes as they went round the hairpin bends. Guilt rose up like bile. She should have come up to visit her more. After Ria's parents died, Suprabha auntie was the only family she was left with. She had immediately gathered up little Ria and brought her to her ancestral home in the hills outside Rani Khet. Rani Khet. It was always filled with love and clouds. She had vivid, colorful memories of the place. All those different fruit trees and flowers she had never seen in the plains, and the caretaker's daughter Gauri, her partner in crime, laughing and whooping on that big old swing. Ria sighed heavily. She hadn't seen Gauri in years either. But you know how it is. Life gets in the way. Work, Nikhil, friends, deadlines, dinners, meetings, always something more urgent, greedily stealing your time and attention. It takes sickness or death to make you finally jump in a car and make the time for stuff that matters. She shook her head and wished she had visited more. It was dusk by the time Ria's car pulled at the gates of Cloud Cottage, a bizarrely modest name for the sprawling bungalow with its huge orchards and terraced gardens. She saw some cars parked in the driveway. Maybe she was too late. A wave of sadness and even more stinging guilt gripped her. She walked hesitantly towards the house, steeling herself for impact. She knew even before she pushed the door open. All the furniture had been pushed back against the walls, and clean white sheets were covering the rich Kashmiri carpets in the large sitting room. Her heart sank. She was late, way too late. Suprabha auntie lay in the center of the room, dignified even in death. She was dressed in one of her famous Tanjavur silk saris. Her favorite gold and emerald ring glistened on her lifeless finger. She looked peaceful and graceful in death as she had in life. Gauri had called Ria the previous day, saying that Suprabha auntie had suddenly become very unwell and was asking for her every time she came to, from her recurring bouts of unconsciousness. So here she was, but alas, dear old Suprabha auntie was not. She had passed away a few hours back. Gauri saw Ria enter the room and came running to her. She took her into her arms and burst out crying. Ria threw her arms around her and held her tightly. Tears rolled down their cheeks. They stood there for a long while, crying for Suprabha auntie and for all the mist ocean of time that stood between them and was now impossible to wade back through. The room was packed with people from the neighborhood who had known and loved Suprabha auntie for many years. But there was no family except for Ria. No one knew why Suprabha auntie had never married. Ria had asked her mother but could never get her to talk about it. Till one day, she cornered Suprabha auntie and asked her. She had just laughed and said, "Never met anyone I could think of sharing my entire life with. And guess what? Who would look after Papaji's property and bake you such scrumptious cakes? And that was the end of that. Suddenly her mouth was filled with the delicious memory of her peach cake, and fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. Darkness fell sooner in these parts, and when it came, it was pitch black. In a matter of minutes, the looming ranges were like giant lumps of coal. It was decided that the cremation would take place the following morning. Lots of people volunteered to stay the night. It was late by the time everyone had found a place to retire. Ria lowered the volume of the bhajans that had been playing in the background. She sat next to her aunt, her gaze fixed on her face. It looked angelic in the dim light of the earthen lamp that was kept near her head. She whispered a sorry, and without any warning, more tears came. Gauri softly patted over and said, "You must be tired after your long drive, Ria. We have a long day ahead. Why don't you go and get some rest?" Ria didn't want to leave. How could she leave Suprabha auntie lying here? But Gauri gently pulled her up. "We'll be right here with her. Don't worry. It's the same room, the one you love. She made us keep that room always ready for you. But you never..." Ria took a sharp breath in, and her face contorted in agony. Gauri whispered, "Sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you." Ria shook her head, and they hugged goodnight. Oh, how she loved this little blue room next to the library in the attic. It had been a favorite hideout ever since she first came to this house. She would stare for hours at the blue lattice work on the windows. She couldn't easily slip into the library where her Nanu, when he was alive, would be sitting at his desk working on the accounts of the estate. She would spend hours reading. She flopped down on the bed and tried to sleep. Her eyes stunk when she closed them. The fight with Nikhil and now Suprabha auntie just gone. The whispering people in the hall, the unsettling quiet in the valley, it all just got twisted and jumbled up inside. Her heart ached, her head throbbed, but no tears came. She lay there in a haze, shoes still on, too tired to move, too tired to sleep. That's when she heard it. It sounded like a whisper. Was it a dream? She rubbed her bleary eyes and tried to listen carefully. There, again. Some whispers. Suddenly she was wide awake. There was no one in the room, but it had sounded like it was right here. Maybe it was some of the neighbors outside. She started to drift off, but then she heard it again. Someone was calling out. It was a whisper, but it was urgent. She sat upright and held her breath. It was coming from the library. Or was it from the window? Now hyper alert, all the fatigue suddenly vanished. She prowled around listening, a little scared but mostly intrigued. She cracked the door open and heard it again. The sound of muffled whispers, like someone whimpering in some kind of pain. How odd. Even in the cool mountain air, she could feel herself sweating now, and her heart pounded loudly. Too loudly. Shh. She stepped out into the dimly lit corridor. The old planks creaked underfoot. She had been right. It was the library. She turned the knob, threw the door wide open, and flicked the switch. The whimpering stopped. There was no one there. Not a soul. She thought she was going insane. Maybe it was just her very mind playing tricks on her. She knew that she was the only one there. So she wasn't sure why, but she still called out. Who is there? Come out now. Again, she looked around just to make sure that no one was there. Nothing. She started to move to the door when suddenly someone whispered, Don't go. Please, don't go. Then there was silence. Who is there? Show yourself, and I will not go, said Ria, who was beyond baffled now. Turn around and walk to the shelf that is right behind you. Yes, come on, come closer. Ria was so perplexed. What the hell was going on? Was this whole thing just a bad dream? Stories of spirits and ghosts up here in the mountains were not uncommon, especially when someone passed on. But Ria was a rationalist. She shook herself awake and forced herself to walk to the bookshelf as directed. Perhaps there was a hidden chamber behind this bookshelf, like in the movies? She started to run her fingers over the spines of the books stacked there to check if there was a catch or a lever, and the shelf would move to reveal a hidden chamber and a perfectly reasonable explanation for all these strange whisperings. As her fingers traveled from spine to spine, the voice hissed, Yes, stop there. She checked out the book. It was the Golden Treasury. She stopped. This was a collection of poems she knew. She had seen it in Suprabha Auntie's hands many times. Pull it out, came the whisper, and she obeyed. Flip through it, came the request. She did exactly what she had been asked to do. As she flipped through the pages, something flew out of the book and fell to the floor. She bent down and saw an old, large, dry rose just next to an old faded picture of a handsome young man in uniform. She picked up the picture and turned it over. In faded ink, she read the words written there. For you, my dearest Suprabha, till I come back. It was signed Amardeep and dated some 55 years back. Pick me up also. Ria jumped, startled. She looked down on the floor at the rose in bewilderment. Have I gone crazy? Is that dry rose talking to me? Yes, it is. I mean, I am. I have been trying to call you. Thank God you found me. You can take me to her. I want to join her on the funeral pyre. Ria picked up the rose carefully from the floor and placed it on her palm and asked, What do you mean? People dry flowers all the time in their books. Sure they do, but I'm special. It was all very long ago, but I remember it well. You see, that young man in the picture? He was madly in love with Suprabha. Judging from how many times she caressed me and read these poems and wept quietly looking at his photo, she loved him too, if you know what I mean. I, young lady, have had the privilege of being the very first and the only flower that he gave her along with his picture before he left. She kept me along with his picture in her favorite book, where we waited and longed and pined, but he was never to return. I stayed here for all these decades. She used to come up from time to time, be with us, and we would read and sit and remember. But it just made her sad, so she came up less and less, and lately she could not climb the stairs. So these poems and I just sat here lonely, waiting and hoping. Today I heard she too has left forever. True love is so rare. Blessed are the ones who get to taste it, even if it is only for a few days. If you find a real connection in this lifetime, make sure you treasure it. Sorry if I sound like a poem. It's the company I've been keeping all these years. Now, please take me to her, won't you? What better way to go than to go along with the love for which I was plucked from the garden? Ria was speechless. She had so many questions, but they all just faded. She was overwhelmed and felt so much love and loss as she pictured her young aunt reading by the window, looking out and waiting day after day, year after year. She suddenly came to. The incessant ringing of her phone pierced her reverie. It was Nikhil. He sounded so worried because she hadn't texted to tell him she'd reached safely. Her face softened. She smiled and said, "I'm fine. I promise. Don't worry. I'm so sorry." They talked way into the night like the old days. In the morning, she woke up early and went downstairs where the preparations for the funeral had begun. She quietly went to where Suprabha auntie lay and hid the faded picture and the dry rose in the folds of her sari. Did Ria see a smile playing on Suprabha auntie's lips, or was it just her imagination?
This is Richa signing off. Take good care of yourselves till I'm back with the next story.